ask you about the legislation that's being debated on the Hill a lot this week by Vic Taves. Do you have any concerns at all about what it could mean for environmental groups? Because we keep hearing that environmental groups could be targeted as kind of eco-terrorists or whatever.
Right.
I mean, do you have concerns about this legislation?
Referring to Bill C-30, which was quite extraordinarily renamed at the last minute. I don't know if you followed that, but the bill that was being distributed in the opposition lobby at first reading said the short title of the bill was the Lawful Access Bill. I actually rose on a point of order to ask if the bill had been properly tabled. Turns out the version that was actually given to the journals and to the table clerk had the short title that they wanted, the quote, Protecting Children from Internet Predators Act, although nothing in the bill is restricted to pursuit of child pornography cases. Nothing in the bill is restricted to internet predators. The term internet predator, other than in the short public relations title, does not appear in the act. I would go more broadly, Julie. I would say I have a significant concern that this government is seeking to suppress legitimate dissent, to demonize our legal rights to speak freely in this country. Yesterday in the House of Commons, the parliamentary secretary, Shelley Glover, referred to the official opposition as anti-Canada. And when asked on a point of order by Denis Coderre to withdraw her comments, she repeated them and essentially said, if you oppose the Northern Gateway Pipeline, which I now refer to as the Great Pipeline of China, if you oppose that project to put super tankers on our coastlines in contravention of a 40-year-long moratorium against oil tankers on the BC coast, if you oppose that, you're not just disagreeing with Stephen Harper. You are now anti-Canada. We've been described, according to Access to Information requests, documents from PMO, people who are concerned about protecting the environment, but also question the lack of economic sense in these proposals, are now described as enemies of the government agenda. We know from Joe Oliver's open letter referred to us as radicals. I now want to make it very clear that I am, as an officer of the Order of Canada, I stand on guard for Canada. And standing on guard for Canada includes protecting our coastlines from oil tankers and ensuring that crude bitumen is used in ways that create the maximum number of Canadian jobs before shipping it to China. There are a lot of things that I believe are, in fact, very closely aligned with loving this country that say the direction on the oil sands expansion and these pipelines and tankers are wrong. Yet this government would seek to demonize us, and I absolutely am concerned that the snooping provisions in C-30 could be used to snag all the cell phone numbers for anyone gathered in lawful protest against these projects, any one of them, or in favor of Kyoto, that they then, with access to cell phone numbers, can go to ISP providers and say, okay, for these cell phone numbers, we want all the other information. We want their email addresses, we want their names. In other words, with one piece of information that they can legally snatch from the airspace around a demonstration, they could get all the information on everybody who was attending who was carrying a cell phone.
And the ultimate goal would be to do what?
Tap phones, surveillance, harassment, who knows, using the powers of the government to increasingly crack down on people who are law-abiding, responsible Canadian citizens who happen to disagree with their government. This is very, very much like the language that Stephen Harper's using, the way they approach this issue. It really does, not just to me, I've seen this reference from others, this really smacks of McCarthyism. This is saying you are an enemy. I can picture the House Committee on Un-Canadian Activities Committee. Have you now or at any time in the past been a card-carrying member of Greenpeace? And this will be now an anti-Canadian activity. This is scary stuff.
When you talked about Shelley Glover in the House yesterday, I did hear her say anti-Canadian, but I was doing something else. Was she talking about the pipeline?
She segued from the concern in her answer and said of the official opposition, and I'm trying to get it exactly right, but she said, you are against this economic development, you are against this and against that. Let's face it, you are against Canada. Yes, but then what happened was when it got clearer, frankly, on Denis Coderre's point of order immediately after QP, and he said, I object as an opposition member to the language that someone is anti-Canadian. His objection was in French, so I may not be translating it exactly perfectly. And her response was to say, I'm entitled to say they are against Canada. They went to Washington and lobbied against Keystone. Now, the only reason I wasn't with Megan Leslie on a trip to Washington to lobby against Keystone is that she didn't mention it ahead of time, or I would have gone with her. So I rose on a point of order to say that I also found it offensive, but I practice a policy called zero tolerance for heckling. So at the point that I'm being shouted down, I merely sit down. So if you look through Hansard, you'll find that partway through my comment, I stop mid-sentence and sit down and hope that I might have the speaker call for order so I could continue. It was very, very clear in her second intervention that, and this is obvious, I've got to say, I know Shelley Glover, I don't dislike, these are not personal comments, but it's very clear that every member of the Conservative Party has pre-scripted talking points, and it's clearly a motif, it's a theme, that anyone who objects to the rapid expansion of the oil sands, the rapid shipment of bitumen crude to other countries for processing and refining, is, in the words of the Prime Minister's office, an enemy, a radical, and anti-Canadian. And that's so offensive to everything that I understand about Canada that they should be ashamed. But they're not ashamed. They repeat these accusations more loudly, more clearly, and the legislation that they're bringing in would allow them to be, and we saw the other recent story about the fact that environmental groups, animal rights groups, and First Nations were being viewed by the Department of Public Safety as being the kinds of groups that one should watch for the potential of terrorist activities. This is against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is the kind of behavior you expect from anti-democratic dictatorships. This is not appropriate behavior for a Canadian government. I mean, 80% of British Columbians support our tanker ban. It's been in effect for 40 years. There is a current tanker ban on the BC coast that's been observed by every Prime Minister and every Premier since 1972.
Democratic dictatorship now, what's it going to be like in 4 years?
Well, I said this is the kind of behavior one expects from an anti-democratic dictatorship. I didn't actually say that Stephen Harper... I don't believe we live in a dictatorship. It's very clear that Stephen Harper behaves like a dictator, but we live in a democracy. We have civil liberties. We have the Charter of Rights and Freedom. Our rights of free speech, our rights of peaceful assembly, our rights to dissent are constitutionally, legally protected rights. And the Prime Minister's rhetoric and that of his the scripts that he hands out to his caucus members would put all that into question in a way that is very anti-democratic.
Raised some concerns about a year ago about the Major Project Management Office pushing unrealistically fast timelines for approval. How would you interpret what they were saying at that time? What does it mean?
Unrealistically, that Enbridge was concerned that the timelines were unrealistically fast?
That were being set at the time. This is before the review panel started.
Well, the fact that, and I may not be quite grasping what it was they said, Mike, so if I haven't got this right, please come back and ask me. But what I've been concerned about as well, and I mentioned this in my response to Joe Oliver's letter, my open letter, it has also been a steady motif and drumbeat from the Harper Conservatives that environmental assessment is nothing but delay, in the same way that they treat Parliament as nothing but delay. Anything that gets in the way of the most ambitious, rapid expansion of oil sands, regardless of where the money comes from or what foreign government is buying up our oil sands, nothing should stand in the way, whether it's a national security review, an environmental assessment, foreign investment reviews, or the legalities that come about through a parliamentary debate. Nothing should stand in the way of rapid development in the oil sands. I know that the Prime Minister's stated goal of 6 million barrels of oil a day has been stated by people in the oil patch as being unrealistic to them. They don't see how we're going to get rapidly to 6 million barrels of oil a day. But the pressures on the National Energy Board Canadian Environmental Assessment Panel are extreme. And I will say right now that there's every indication that we will see in the next few weeks or months a real attack on the existence of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency and its ability to do its work.
What do you see countries like Japan and Russia doing? Like, is it possible they could pull out as well? Or what is their situation in terms of if they don't meet their targets? Why do you think they're justifying remaining within the treaty?
Well, Japan spoke to this in COP17 in Durban, and the fact that the rumor of Canada's potential withdrawal, even though Peter Kent denied it in Durban, that goes to my previous point about negotiating in bad faith and behaving in ways that were duplicitous. The reality is that with the pall was cast on the conference, the possibility that Canada might legally withdraw. Only because that rumor was in the air did Japan, in its presentation, state very clearly Japan has no intention of legally withdrawing from Kyoto. But Japan has, at this point, refused to take on a second commitment period under Kyoto. Japan has, under the Kyoto Protocol, substantially reduced its emissions, but it looks unlikely to reach its target by the end of this year for fully reaching its targets. It certainly hasn't done what Canada has done, which is to repudiate targets and rapidly expand and increase our emissions. So what do I expect? Russia and Japan have neither of them. Japan has explicitly rejected the idea it might legally withdraw. Russia hasn't explicitly rejected it, but I see no reason why they would withdraw. They have pushed, as well as other countries have, to ensure that the Kyoto Protocol continues into a second commitment period. This is essential. There will be no agreement to this other, right, as I referred to, and I don't know if you were here for the first quote that I read from the February 14th meeting in New Delhi of the BASIC countries, where they're saying, look, how do you expect us to believe you, industrialized countries, particularly Canada, will cast aside one legally binding agreement because you say you want a different one? Why would we think, well, you'll ever agree to a legally binding commitment? So it's important for the countries around the world that Kyoto continues. It underpins absolutely everything in the negotiations, even on the second track, working towards targets by 2015. And there will be no penalties, obviously, for Japan either, because there are no penalties under the Kyoto Protocol. The only enforcement mechanism under Kyoto would apply to a country like Japan if they were to take on a second commitment period, in that for anything they negotiated as a target for reductions post-2013, there would be a 0.3 ton additional emissions reduction required. But again, since the target one negotiates is a product of negotiation, Canada or Japan could easily negotiate a target in the second commitment period that took into account going 0.3 of a ton below what they thought they could do, so that when they had the top up, they had a reasonable target that they could achieve. I'm saddened, very saddened, that Japan has not taken on a second commitment period target. And I think that Canada's role has been to undermine the legally binding targets for the second period under Kyoto, because we've set such a bad example and we've tried to pull other countries with us.
Can I just ask you about back to the legislation?
Yeah.
Amend it, the lawful access legislation, or is it really just a piece of work?
Yeah, there's one or two good things in the legislation. I think it's good to have the criminal code deal not only with harassing telephone calls, but to keep up with the times and deal with cyber bullying. I think that's kind of good improvement. But anything to do with accessing people's private information without a warrant should be removed from the Act. They can't fix that. And certainly the information commissioners, both federally and provincially in Ontario, have been very clear. In matter of fact, saying, look, what you're doing is, because the internet criminal element is always going to be far more sophisticated technologically than the government of Canada. Let's face it. They're going to innovate. They're going to have ways to security encrypt their information. And on top of that, the government of Canada is going to force internet service providers to keep real-time records so that they can intercept at any moment. This interception-ready provision requires, and to keep the database that will be required so that the government can go to them without warrant and get this information, really means that we've set up a situation, as the Information Commissioner pointed out, the Ontario Commissioner, Anne Kavukian, where hackers will have a gold mine of information that they otherwise wouldn't be able to access. So we actually increase the risk of internet crime while providing an excessive and unnecessary level of big brother snooping from the federal government into our lives.
What do you make of the attacks that are going on regarding Vic Taves on Twitter?
The WikiLeaks. I don't think we should drag anybody's personal life into. I think was it Charlie Angus said there's quite enough that's disturbing about his public life. We really don't need to get into his private life. But it's if in a world of social media, it's the kind of thing that politicians should think about. I mean, I think it's unfortunate that anybody's dirty laundry is dragged out and put on tweets. But I find what Vic Taves has been doing so despicable, equating protection of civil liberties with child pornographers, and going back not that long ago when he attacked Joe Comartin on the floor of the House because Joe Comartin had been, as a lawyer, defense counsel. And this was despicable behavior from a minister of the Crown to say to Joe Comartin, that member made his money off criminals. No wonder that member sides with criminals. That kind of language is absolutely unacceptable. Vic Taves should have his mouth washed out with soap. I don't care what he did in his private life. He is a disgrace as a minister of the Crown.
But he said he never said what he said in the House.
I heard what he said in the House. And I saw it again on video, and I read it in Hansard. So he may think that he has sort of, I don't know, which spell was it that the kids could use in Harry Potter? Obliviate, to make you forget your memory? Well, Vic Taves doesn't have that power, so I remember what he said. And he can't just tell me or Don. What's that? Being torqued. I heard what he said. You stand with us or you stand with child pornographers. He doesn't give us much choice. I was even cheering on Margaret Wenty today in the Globe, and I rarely do that. She said, okay, I stand with the child pornographers. I mean, he was very clear what he said. He also said if we care about, and so did Peter MacKay, if we care about ending, Canada's position on torture, that we as a country will not use information obtained by torture. You know what they said about us then? We don't care about our constituents. There's a whole plane load of your constituents, men, women, and children, and they're going to die because you won't use information that comes from torture. I mean, it's not just one random incident of demonization of opponents through the most outrageous exaggerations, ad hominem attacks, and turning every legitimate question and criticism into a personal attack against the moral character of opposition members of parliament. And it absolutely must stop. It is disgraceful behavior. And I realize we're probably ready for the next press conference. Probably time for one quick question. Just checking with Norm. You're okay? Merci à tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, bonne fête Kyoto pour les 7 ans, pour le moment que Kyoto était en vigueur depuis 7 années. And in English, happy birthday, Kyoto. I'm very glad there's a second period under Kyoto. Peter Kent may declare Kyoto dead, but any Canadian who cares about Canada's international reputation and our fight against climate change, please go to keepkyoto.ca and sign up. Thanks very much. Merci.